21 days, no breaks, no skipped mornings, no nights where I told myself I'd catch up tomorrow. I held a single vibrational frequency, one tied to a being the ancient Egyptians considered the architect of language, the keeper of cosmic records, the God who weighed your soul against a feather. And I held it without flinching for 3 full weeks. And nothing happened. At least, that's what I thought on day 19. Then the coincidences started. And I want to be precise about that word, coincidences, because what I experienced didn't feel like magic in the way most people imagine magic. There were no visions, no voices, no dramatic moment where the room filled with light. What happened was quieter, stranger, and in some ways far more unsettling than any of that. But before I can tell you what happened to me, I need to take you somewhere older. Somewhere the idea of divine frequency wasn't metaphor, it was mathematics. Where the gods didn't just speak the world into being, they calculated it, measured it, encoded it. Because Thoth isn't just a figure from mythology. He's an idea that has refused to die across 5,000 years of human civilization. And once you understand why, the 21 days I'm about to describe will make a very different kind of sense. Let's start with who Thoth actually was. Not the simplified version, not the ibis-headed figure you've seen on a museum poster, but what the Egyptians themselves believed when they invoked his name. Thoth, known in the oldest texts as Jehudi, was not a deity of war or fertility or the harvest. He held a different kind of power, the kind that sits beneath all other powers. He was the god of writing, yes, but more precisely, he was the god of the mechanics behind writing. The reason symbols can carry meaning, the reason spoken sound can encode thought, the reason mathematics doesn't just describe the world, it predicts it. The Egyptians called him the tongue of Ra, not the voice, the tongue, the instrument of precision, the part of the divine that shapes raw breath into exact, world-altering utterance. And in the cosmological framework of ancient Egypt, this was not a poetic title. Words, specifically words spoken in the correct vibrational sequence, were understood to be the literal mechanism of creation. The god Ra spoke the world into existence. Thoth was the one who made sure those words were correct. He was the divine scribe present at the moment of cosmic origin. He recorded what was spoken. He maintained it. He corrected errors when the universe drifted. And when a human being died and stood before the scales of Ma'at, one side holding the feather of truth, the other holding the weight of a life, it was Thoth who stood beside the scales with a reed and a scroll, writing down the result. That detail matters more than it might seem. Thoth wasn't just an archivist of morality, he was the witness, the one whose record could not be disputed, appealed, or rewritten. In a culture that built civilization on the Nile's precision, planting and flooding timed to the inch, Thoth represented the cosmic version of that precision. The idea that reality itself is held in place by accurate record-keeping, by frequency maintained without error. The Greeks recognized something in this when they encountered Egyptian religion. They mapped Thoth onto their own Hermes, the messenger god, the trickster, the guide of souls. But they also gave him a new name, Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice greatest. And they credited him with a body of knowledge so vast it couldn't have come from a mortal mind. That body of knowledge became the foundation of Hermetic philosophy, and Hermetic philosophy became, quietly, invisibly, the philosophical skeleton inside alchemy, inside Renaissance science, inside Freemasonry, inside the occult revival of the 19th century, and inside the modern consciousness movement that millions of people participate in today without knowing its name. Thoth didn't disappear when Egypt fell. He shape-shifted. He moved into the architecture of Western thought, the way a frequency moves through a wall, changed in form, unchanged in nature. Now, the oldest surviving Hermetic texts, the ones attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, contain a concept that modern readers often skim past without registering its weight. The concept is this: the universe is not made of matter, it is made of mind. And mind expresses itself through vibration, sound, frequency, the mathematical relationships between things. This is not New Age invention. The Kybalion, one of the most widely read summaries of Hermetic principles, states plainly, everything is in motion, everything vibrates, nothing is at rest. But this idea wasn't born in 1908 when the Kybalion was published. It was already ancient when the pyramids were young. The Egyptians understood the sacred power of resonance. Their temples weren't just architectural achievements. Certain chambers were designed to produce specific acoustic effects. Low frequencies that you felt in your sternum. Harmonic overtones that seemed to come from nowhere. Spaces calibrated not just for sight, but for sound. Because Thoth's domain wasn't silence, it was the exact opposite. It was the precise, measured, intentional use of vibration to align the human being with something larger. To tune the instrument of the self to the frequency of the divine record. And the Egyptians believed, with everything they built, everything they wrote, everything they sacrificed, that this alignment was not a metaphor, it was a technology. I'm Daniel, and this is Hermetic Talk. And what I want to explore with you today is what that technology actually looks like when you put it into practice. Not in a temple, not in ancient Egypt, right now, in the ordinary days of an ordinary life. Because that's what the 21 days were really about. Before I tell you what I actually did during those 3 weeks, I want to explain why 21 days specifically, because this is the part most people skip. And skipping it means missing the entire internal logic of the practice. 21 is not a random interval. It appears with suspicious regularity across spiritual traditions that had no documented contact with each other, and that consistency is worth pausing on. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, more accurately translated as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, the soul of the deceased navigates a journey through the Duat, the underworld, facing 42 judges across a series of trials. 42, which is 2 times 21. The number doesn't appear once and vanish. It's structural. It defines the shape of the transformation the soul undergoes between death and what comes after. The Hermetic tradition, drawing from Egyptian sources, describes cycles of 7. 7 days, 7 planetary influences, 7 vibrational registers that the initiated consciousness must pass through to reach full integration. Before we continue, there's something I want to place in your hands. We've gathered 12 years of Hermetic source material, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Emerald Tablets, and more, stripped of fear bait and rebuilt as a working initiatory sequence into a single 3-volume library for those who feel the pull towards something deeper. Because whether we speak of clearing the field of what was never yours, architecting reality through the 7 Hermetic laws as machinery, or building an auric field with weight that walks into a room ahead of you, one truth remains. Understanding without sequence leaves the ground unowned and nothing moves. This is for anyone who's ready to work the initiation in the order it was always meant to be worked. You'll find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here. I'll give you a moment to do that. Three complete cycles of 7 gives you 21, a number that carries the geometric logic of completion. Not arrival at a destination, but the closing of a circle that was opened at the start. And then there's the neurological angle, which I find compelling not because it replaces the spiritual reasoning, but because it runs parallel to it. Research on habit formation, including work by Philippa Lally at University College London, found that the average time for a new behavior to become automatic sits somewhere between 18 and 66 days, with 21 days being a commonly observed early threshold. This is when the behavior stops requiring active effort and starts requiring active effort to stop. Thoth, in Hermetic cosmology, governs exactly this transition point. The moment where deliberate practice becomes integrated pattern, where the human will stops fighting against entropy and begins moving with it. This is why 21 days appears in so many esoteric systems. It's not numerological decoration. It maps onto something real about how consciousness changes, slowly, imperceptibly, and then all at once. I want to share something that happened to me before I even began the practice, something I almost dismissed as irrelevant. I'd been researching Thoth for a previous video, pulling sources, cross-referencing timelines, when I noticed a pattern in my own notes. Every time I hit a genuine insight, a connection between two sources I hadn't seen made before, it happened on a day divisible by 7. Day 7 of research, day 14, day 21. I didn't track it intentionally. I only noticed it looking backward. Now, a skeptic would say, you noticed the hits and forgot the misses. Confirmation bias. And that skeptic might be right. But here's what I couldn't dismiss. The insight on day 21 was the one that restructured everything I thought I knew about the relationship between Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus. It wasn't incremental. It arrived whole, like something that had been assembling itself underneath the surface of my awareness and finally broke through. That experience is what planted the seed for the practice I decided to attempt. Now, the specific frequency associated with Thoth in modern Hermetic and sound healing traditions is 936 Hz, sometimes listed as a solfeggio frequency connected to the pineal gland, the so-called third eye, and to what practitioners describe as divine or cosmic consciousness. The pineal gland itself has a long and fascinating history in esoteric thought. Descartes called it the seat of the soul. The Egyptians depicted it symbolically as the eye of Horus. Many ancient mystery traditions treated the activation of this gland through specific practices, frequencies, and meditative states as the central work of initiation. Modern neuroscience has established that the pineal gland produces melatonin, regulates circadian rhythms, and may, though research is ongoing and contested, produce trace amounts of DMT under specific conditions. The spiritual traditions weren't wrong that something important lives at the center of the brain. They were describing it in the only language they had. So when I say I held Thoth's divine frequency, I mean something specific. I sat with 936 Hz audio, a pure tone generated to precise mathematical specification for 30 minutes each morning, without interruption, for 21 consecutive days. I didn't chant, I didn't visualize. I didn't try to make anything happen. I just listened. And I recorded everything. The first 7 days I recorded. Nothing worth mentioning. Mild relaxation. Occasional drowsiness. One morning where my mind felt unusually clear afterward, but I'd slept well that night, so I didn't count it. Day 8 through 14, things started to shift, but not in ways I expected. I need to be honest about something before I describe what happened in week 2, because I think honesty is the thing that's almost always missing from these kinds of accounts. I personally think the most underrated aspect of any serious esoteric practice is the part nobody films, the days where nothing happens, where you sit in the frequency and feel absolutely nothing, and you have to decide whether you're going to continue anyway. That decision, the unglamorous, unfilmed choice to show up when showing up offers no reward, is, I'm now convinced, the actual practice. Everything else is what happens after you've proven to the practice that you're serious. Days 8 through 14 looked like this. Day 8. I noticed about 20 minutes into the session that my thoughts had stopped competing with each other. If you've ever tried any form of meditation, you know the ordinary state of mind is more like a crowded waiting room than a quiet space. Thoughts arriving, interrupting each other, demanding attention. On day 8, for roughly 4 minutes, the waiting room emptied. Not dramatically, just quieted. I wrote in my journal afterward, something settled. Day 9 through 11. Nothing I could clearly articulate, but a background quality of the days felt different. Less friction. Not absence of difficulty, The same external pressures were still present, but something in how I was moving through them had changed. The way changing the soles of your shoes changes how a surface feels underfoot. Day 12. A dream I still haven't fully made sense of. I was in a library, not a modern one, something older, the kind with stone floors and torchlight, and I was looking for a specific text. In the dream, I knew exactly which text I needed. I could feel the urgency of needing it. But every time I reached for a scroll or a book, the writing on it rearranged before I could read it. And standing at the far end of the library, not doing anything, just watching, was a figure in white, ibis-headed, unhurried. I wrote that dream down the moment I woke up. I write most of my dreams down, a habit I picked up years ago after reading a paper on how dream recall training correlates with increases in waking creative insight. But this one felt different. Not sacred exactly, more like received, like something that came from outside the usual territory of my own imagination. Day 13 and 14. The calm from day 8 returned and stayed. Not bliss, not transcendence, something more workable than either of those, a kind of functional steadiness that let me sit with problems longer before reacting to them. Now, I want to address the skeptical reading here directly, because I take it seriously. Everything I've described so far is explainable without reference to anything supernatural. 30 minutes of daily tonal listening is, functionally, a form of sound bath meditation. Meditation has well-documented neurological effects: reduction in default mode network activity, increases in alpha wave production, measurable changes in cortisol levels. The library dream could be straightforward symbolic processing. I spend a lot of time around texts. I'm engaged in deep research on a figure associated with writing and knowledge. Of course, my dreaming mind builds that architecture. I'm not going to argue with any of that. I held those explanations alongside the experience, not against it. What I couldn't immediately explain began on day 15. I was in a conversation with someone I'd known for several years, a thoughtful person, not someone I'd ever have described as interested in esotericism, when they said, completely unprompted, that they'd been reading about Hermes Trismegistus. Not Thoth, not the Hermetic tradition generally, Hermes Trismegistus specifically, the exact node of research I was sitting in the center of. I didn't say anything. I let them talk. They'd stumbled onto the Emerald Tablet through a chain of reading they couldn't quite reconstruct, and they wanted to know if I knew anything about it. One coincidence. Noted. Day 17. I opened a book I'd owned for 2 years and never read past the introduction, a dense academic text on Egyptian cosmology. And the page I happened to open to was a detailed analysis of Thoth's role in the weighing of the heart ceremony, the exact passage I needed for a section of my research I'd been stuck on for 4 days. 2 coincidences, still possible, still within the range of ordinary pattern recognition. Day 19, I found a letter, a physical letter, handwritten, that I'd forgotten I'd received and tucked into a drawer, and the date on it was exactly 21 days before the day I found it, as if something had timed the discovery. The letter itself wasn't mystical, but the number it carried stopped me cold. That was the moment I stopped calling them coincidences. So let's talk about what was actually happening. Because here's the thing, I'm not someone who defaults to mystical explanations. I've spent years studying ancient Egyptian theology with the same skeptical rigor I'd apply to any serious academic discipline. And the question I kept returning to, especially after day 19, wasn't whether something supernatural was occurring. It was a more precise question. What is the mechanism by which an intentional inner state, a sustained, disciplined frequency, begins to reshape the external field of perception and experience? Jung called it synchronicity. He defined it carefully, deliberately, as an acausal connecting principle, a meaningful coincidence that cannot be explained through ordinary cause and effect. The key word is meaningful, not just unusual, not just statistically improbable, but meaningful in relation to the inner state of the observer. That specificity matters enormously, because it separates synchronicity from superstition. Jung wasn't saying the universe sends you magic parking spots because you thought positive thoughts. He was pointing at something far more structurally interesting. Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why we have Insights Academy, a free newsletter where I go deeper into hidden knowledge, ancient wisdom, metaphysics, and the nature of consciousness, the knowledge we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive the Kabbalion as a welcome gift. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that. Interesting that psyche and matter are not fully separate systems, that at certain depths of inner coherence, the boundary between subjective experience and objective event becomes not erased, but porous. Now here is where Thoth enters the picture in a way that still makes me pause. Thoth, in Egyptian theological tradition, was not simply a god of writing or wisdom in the colloquial sense. He was the principle of cosmic order, expressed through precise articulation. He was the logos before the Greeks had a word for it. The Egyptians called this principle ma'at, divine truth, balanced order, the harmonic structure underlying all of reality. And Thoth was its voice, its recorder, its enforcer. What this means in cosmological terms is that Thoth represents the function by which consciousness and reality remain in correspondence. Not in loose metaphorical terms, but as a literal cosmological mechanism. In the Hermetic tradition that descends from Egyptian theology, and which preserved and transmitted these ideas through the Greek-speaking world, this principle became foundational. The Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum, the later alchemical traditions, all of them are working with the same underlying claim, that when the inner state aligns with divine order, the outer world reflects it back. As above, so below. Not as poetry, as architecture. This is what I began to understand during the final days of the 21-day practice. I wasn't just meditating on Thoth as a concept or a historical figure. I was attempting to hold consistently, without interruption, the internal state that Thoth represents. Precision, clarity, the refusal to distort reality with wishful thinking or fear, a kind of sacred intellectual rigor turned inward. And if the Hermetic framework is correct, if consciousness and cosmos are genuinely in correspondence, then sustained inner coherence of that particular quality should, theoretically, produce exactly what I was experiencing. An increase in meaningful resonance between inner intention and outer event. Not magic, architecture. And the specific nature of the coincidences mattered. They weren't generic good luck. They weren't vague feelings of positivity. They were precise. They were relevant. They arrived at exactly the moments I needed them, in forms that directly addressed the exact questions I was sitting with. That kind of specificity is what separates genuine synchronicity from the ordinary human tendency toward confirmation bias. I was tracking this carefully. I kept notes. Not every unusual thing that happened made it into my record, only the ones that met a strict internal test. Would this have stopped me cold, regardless of what I was looking for? In almost every case across the final 10 days, the answer was yes. Let me be specific about what the practice actually involved, because this is where most modern spiritual frameworks fail the people they're trying to help. They describe outcomes without describing the actual internal work required to produce them. And the internal work required to hold what I'm calling the Thoth frequency is not comfortable. It is not a guided relaxation. It is not 20 minutes of ambient music and candlelight. It is rigorous, it is demanding, and it will surface everything in you that opposes it. The core of the practice is this. Thoth, in Egyptian cosmology, functions as the principle of divine speech, Heka, the magical creative power of precise, truth-aligned utterance. Every word Thoth speaks is reality-shaping, because every word Thoth speaks is perfectly aligned with Ma'at. There is no distortion, no self-deception, no gap between what is known and what is said. That alignment between inner knowing and outer expression is the essence of what the frequency demands. Which means the first thing the practice does is force you to confront every place where you are not in that alignment. Every story you tell yourself that isn't quite true. Every comfortable narrative you've built around your failures, your relationships, your sense of who you are and why you make the choices you make. Within the first 4 days of holding this intention deliberately and consistently, I found myself in a sustained state of mild discomfort that I can only describe as the sensation of being gently but relentlessly audited. I'm Daniel, and if you've been following Hermetic Talk for any length of time, you'll know that I always try to give you the honest version of these practices, not the glamorized highlight reel. And the honest version here is that days 3 through 7 were genuinely difficult. Not because anything dramatic happened externally, but because when you hold the internal frequency of absolute truth as a sustained intention, your own interior becomes very loud about all the ways you've been approximating it. The practice itself structured around 4 daily elements. The first was invocation, not in the theatrical ceremonial sense, but as a genuine internal act of alignment. Each morning, I would spend between 15 and 20 minutes deliberately bringing to mind the qualities I associate with Thoth: precision, clarity, the willingness to see without distortion, the courage to speak what is true. Not as affirmations, as internal postures, states I was trying to actually occupy rather than just describe. The second element was scribal practice, daily writing, but of a specific kind. Not journaling in the therapeutic sense, more like dictation. I would write what I actually observed, as precisely as I could, stripping out interpretation and emotional editorializing wherever I caught it. This sounds simple. It is brutally difficult. The gap between what we observe and what we tell ourselves about what we observe is vast and almost invisible until you start trying to close it every day with deliberate attention. Third was study. Deep, focused engagement with primary Hermetic and Egyptian texts. Not reading for entertainment or even information, reading to interrogate, to find the places where these frameworks touch something real versus the places where they are merely ornate. I've spent years building a working library for exactly this kind of study, and the texts I returned to most during this period were the pyramid texts, specific sections of the Corpus Hermeticum, and a translation of the Book of Thoth fragments that I'd had sitting on my shelf for an embarrassingly long time before finally giving it the attention it deserved. And the fourth element was silence. Each evening, between 45 minutes and an hour of sitting in deliberate, structured quiet. Not meditation in the contemporary mindfulness sense, something older and more demanding. An attempt to hold a completely still interior, to observe thought without generating it. The Egyptians had a concept for this inner stillness that they considered essential to any genuine contact with divine intelligence. The Greeks borrowed it and called it hesychia. And it is, I can tell you from direct experience, significantly harder than it sounds. What these 4 elements together produced, when practiced consistently, without skipping days, without softening the requirements when you're tired or resistant, was a gradual but unmistakable shift in the quality of attention I was bringing to everything. Not a mood change, not an emotional uplift, a structural shift in perception. The world began to feel, and I'm choosing this word carefully, readable, as if the signal-to-noise ratio had changed. Here is where I want to slow down and go deeper into the source material, because the idea of a divine frequency connected to Thoth isn't a modern New Age retrofit onto ancient mythology. It is embedded explicitly and precisely in the oldest Egyptian texts we have, texts that predate the Greek philosophical tradition by thousands of years and that encode a cosmological framework of startling sophistication. The pyramid texts, dated conservatively to around 2400 BCE, but drawing on oral and priestly traditions far older, contain repeated references to Thoth as the figure who restores Horus, the principle of rightful order and consciousness after conflict and dismemberment. The language used in these passages is not incidental. Thoth restores through speech, through precise, ma'at-aligned articulation. The wounded or fragmented aspect of consciousness is made whole not through force, not through sacrifice in the ordinary sense, but through the application of truth-aligned divine speech. The word heals. The word reconstitutes. The word, when perfectly aligned with cosmic order, has the power to literally reconstruct reality. This is not metaphor, or rather, it is not merely metaphor. The Egyptian priestly tradition treated it as a working description of how consciousness and cosmos interact. The later Hermetic texts, written in Greek but deeply Egyptian in their metaphysical structure, made this principle explicit in a way that allows us to understand the cosmological claim more precisely. The Corpus Hermeticum describes the process by which divine nous, divine mind or intelligence, descends into matter, becomes enmeshed in it, forgets its origin, and must then find its way back through a process of remembrance and realignment. Thoth, in this framework, is the guide of that process, not external to the seeker, but present as an internal faculty, the part of consciousness that retains, even in the depths of forgetfulness, the capacity to recognize truth. This is personally one of the aspects of the Hermetic tradition I find most remarkable, and I'll say directly that I think this is the most underrated dimension of the entire framework. Not the correspondences table, not the planetary magic, not even the alchemy, as extraordinary as that is. It's this: the idea that the divine intelligence is not waiting outside you to be petitioned. It is a faculty within you that can be activated, trained, and sustained, and that when it is, the relationship between your inner state and your outer world changes in ways that are structurally predictable. The Book of Thoth, the fragments we have of it, preserved in later Demotic papyri, describes an initiation process that was evidently both real and demanding. The student of Thoth was not simply acquiring knowledge in the academic sense. They were being transformed. The texts describe a process of internal dissolution followed by reconstitution, the classic pattern of genuine initiation across every tradition. But they describe it in specifically cognitive and perceptual terms. The initiate's capacity to perceive reality accurately is systematically expanded. The distortions introduced by fear, desire, social conditioning, ego investment, these are progressively removed. What remains is a clarity of perception that the texts describe as divine. Not metaphorically divine, divine in the specific sense that it begins to participate in the same order of perception that the gods themselves embody. The weighing of the heart ceremony, the famous judgment scene from the Book of the Dead, is Thoth's ceremony in a very specific sense. Thoth records the verdict. Thoth speaks the result. And the heart being weighed is not being judged for its good deeds in any simple moral sense. It is being measured for its alignment with Ma'at, its correspondence with divine truth. A heart that has distorted reality, deceived itself, built elaborate structures of self-justification, that heart is heavy. Not metaphorically. In the Egyptian cosmological framework, the distortions themselves have mass. Truth has a specific gravity, and it is lighter than a feather. What I kept returning to across the entire 21-day practice was the question of whether these ancient frameworks were encoding genuine psychological and perceptual discoveries, real observations about how human consciousness works and how it can be transformed in the language available to the culture that made them. My working hypothesis, which this practice did nothing to disconfirm, is yes. The Egyptians were not making up stories. They were recording maps. And Thoth is one of those maps. One of the most sophisticated and least understood maps of how consciousness navigates its way back to clarity. Day 21 arrived quietly. There was no dramatic culmination, no vision, no thunderclap, no moment of obvious sacred revelation. And I think that's important to say plainly, because the absence of drama is itself one of the most significant things I can report. The practice had worked its way into my daily structure so thoroughly that the 21st day felt less like an ending and more like a threshold I had simply walked past without quite noticing. But the weeks that followed were different. The synchronicities did not stop on day 21. If anything, they became more frequent and more precise. Within 5 days of completing the practice, I had 3 separate conversations with people in different contexts, none of whom knew each other, that each addressed, from a different angle, a question I had been privately sitting with for months about the direction of this channel and the kind of research I wanted to pursue next. None of these people knew what I was thinking about. 2 of them didn't even know what the channel covered. And yet each conversation landed with a surgical relevance that I found genuinely difficult to rationalize. I also noticed a change that I hadn't anticipated and that I find harder to describe than the synchronicities. A change in the quality of my thinking. Specifically in the speed and clarity with which I could identify my own distortions in real time. The scribal practice, that daily discipline of writing observation without interpretation, had apparently installed something that continued operating even after I stopped doing the formal exercise. I would catch myself mid-thought, mid-conversation, mid-sentence, noticing the gap between what I actually knew and what I was about to say as if they had slightly different textures. The truth had a specific feel. The approximation of truth had a different one. And once you've trained yourself to notice that difference, you cannot unnotice it. This, I think, is the real legacy of the Thoth frequency as a sustained practice. Not the synchronicities, as extraordinary as those were. Not the increased sense of meaningful resonance with the world, but the perceptual upgrade that the practice installs in your own cognitive architecture. The ancient texts promised exactly this. They describe the student of Thoth emerging from the initiation process with a fundamentally different relationship to truth. Not just knowing more true things, but having a different and more direct access to the process by which truth is discerned. I want to be direct about what I am and am not claiming here. I am not claiming that 21 days of this practice will produce mystical powers. I am not claiming that Thoth is a literal divine being who will personally intervene in your life if you perform the correct rituals. What I am claiming, based on direct, carefully observed experience and on the substantial weight of ancient testimony from traditions that understood the architecture of consciousness with a sophistication we are only beginning to recover, is this. Sustained, disciplined alignment with the principle that Thoth represents will change your perception. And changed perception changes what you notice. And what you notice changes what you do. And what you do changes what becomes possible. That chain of causation is not supernatural. It is, in the deepest sense, natural. It is the natural consequence of bringing your interior into alignment with the order that the Egyptians called Ma'at and the Hermetists called the All. The coincidences are not the universe rewarding you. They are the universe becoming legible to you, because you have cleaned enough of the distorting lens through which you normally see it. After the 21 days, a viewer left a comment on my video about the Emerald Tablet that I keep coming back to. They wrote, "I started this thinking it was history. I finished it thinking it was instructions." That sentence has stayed with me because it captures something I've been trying to articulate across the work of this channel for years. The ancient Hermetic and Egyptian frameworks were never simply theological. They were always operational. They were always maps. And Thoth, of all the principles encoded in that ancient tradition, is perhaps the most operational of all. He is not the destination. He is the faculty by which you navigate toward it. The 21 days ended. The practice, in a real sense, did not. Because once you have held that frequency long enough for it to become a structural feature of how you perceive and think, you are not the same navigator you were before. The map is inside you now, and the territory begins to reveal itself differently. Not because it changed, but because you finally became capable of